Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our journey this evening of our walk through the gastrointestinal tract. It's a journey many people are unaware of what happens in our gastrointestinal tract. But after tonight, you will no longer wonder what happens. It is an incredible process that changes the food that's on our plate to microscopic little substances that gets absorbed into our blood. And Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. So anything that goes into this hollow tube is not part of you or me until it gets broken down and it gets into the blood. So let's have a look at the process. It all begins in the mouth. So the first organ is the mouth. And the pH in the mouth is an alkaline pH. And there are some enzymes that work in an alkaline environment and some enzymes work in an acid environment, as you will see. Now, the mouth is the only part of the gastrointestinal tract we have say over. We have say over what goes in. We have say over when it goes in. We have say over how much goes in. We have say over how long it's in the mouth, whether it's two chews and swallow, or whether it's a nice 30 chews. And we also have say over the environment of entry. If it's a stressful, rushed environment, or whether it's a nice, relaxed environment. Now, these 5 different choices that we make affect all the way down the gastrointestinal tract, even to the point of affecting how it's broken down. And if it's not broken down properly, it actually can't be absorbed into our blood, as we will see. Now, there are 2 food groups that are broken down in the mouth. Notice that our mouth has exposed bone, that's teeth, and there's no teeth anywhere else. And so we should be chewing. When we chew our food very, very well, we make a larger surface area so that the enzymes are able to work on the food a little bit better. Dr. Kellogg, very famous doctor, he wrote a book called The Itinerary of a Breakfast, similar to what I'm showing you today, but not quite as detailed. He said if you chew nuts and there's one little lump you don't chew, so it remains a little lump, guess what? It comes out a little lump because there's no teeth anywhere else. So it's very important to chew. In fact, I was reading in one book, and you may have heard this saying, we should drink our food and chew our drinks. Meaning, when you have water or even a vegetable juice, you should swish it around in your mouth a little bit to warm it, to mix it with digestive juices, especially if it's juice, although there's not much digestion with the juice. And with food, we should chew the food until it's almost a liquid. And when we do that, it's so much easier for everyone further down the gastrointestinal tract. Also, when we chew very well, it gives the brain an opportunity to assess what's there so that it can tell the organs further down, there's a bit of protein coming, there's a little bit of fats coming, so it can prepare the other organs for what's coming. But if it's chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, chew, chew, swallow, the other organs are waiting and they're saying to the brain, what's coming? And the brain says, I don't know. It's gone before I even knew. So it's important to keep the food in the mouth, to chew slowly. I always marvel that we love eating so much. Why do we rush it? Have you noticed? It is something that we should take time to chew and enjoy. So what are the foods that are broken down in the mouth? One food is starch. Another word for starch is carbohydrates. So your starches are all your grains, there's your breads, your cereals, your pastas, all the grain foods. And the enzyme is a salivary amylase called ptyalin. So ptyalin is the salivary amylase that breaks down starch. And it is not present in the human mouth until the baby develops molars. The molars come through back here. So the first teeth a baby gets is 4 at the top, 4 at the bottom, and they're called tearing teeth. I also call it taste time, but the core, what traditionally those 8 teeth have been called is milk teeth, because that should be baby's main food, is milk. That should be their main food, because they don't have enough teeth to break down food sufficiently to be able to digest it. And I remember when I had babies, my girlfriends used to say, just mash it up, Barbara. And I used to think that makes no sense to me. It makes no sense at all. Babies should not eat food until they can sit, till they can pick it up and put it in their mouth, and they've got a few teeth. And the type of the teeth are an indication of what they eat. So the first food, which is taste food, should be maybe at the meal table a bit of cucumber, maybe a piece of apple, maybe some pear. I used to give my babies the stalk of a cabbage leaf or the stalk of a lettuce leaf, a stick of celery. And it takes them such a long time. So by the time you've finished your meal, they're just about through theirs. It's taste time. I remember my little grandson, he was only about 8 months, and he had a piece of cucumber, and I think he had 3 teeth. And by the end of the meal, there were little bits of cucumber all over this little tray, and little bits of cucumber all over the floor, and a few got in. That's how they should be introduced to food, just little by little by little. Then the next teeth that come are the molars through here, and they come through anywhere between 14 and 22 months of age. And when the molars come through, then ptyalin is released. Because what do the molars do? They grind. What do we grind? Grain. So that's when the grain should be introduced, when the molars are fully through. Many people have gut problems because they were introduced to starch too young as babies. One lady said to me, "Where's the science behind this?" I said, "Go and find an anatomy and physiology book and read it for yourself." And looking at traditionally, 100, 200 years ago and previous, babies were not fed food until they were 2, sometimes 3. It's only the last 80 years that they've been feeding baby food too young. The other food that's broken down in the mouth, or it starts in the mouth, is the saturated fat. In our second lecture, we're going to be defining fats. So the saturated fat, there's butter, coconut, palm oil, shea butter, coconut butter. Also in your nuts, your macadamia nuts, they're quite high in your saturated fats. Underneath the tongue, there are sublingual glands that release lingual lipase. And lingual lipase is the enzyme that breaks down the saturated fat. No other fats are broken down in the mouth. That's your saturated fats. So coming down the mouth, the swallowing reflex closes the trachea so the food goes down into the stomach. And then we come through a little double-layered or bi-layered valve called the cardiac sphincter. It's called the cardiac sphincter because it sits quite close to the cardiac muscle or the heart muscle. And then we come down into the stomach. Now, some people suffer from a condition called reflux or heartburn, GERDs, where the acid, because the stomach is a very acid environment. And as you will see, this acid environment is very important because it's only in an acid environment that the enzymes work. And so, what's acid reflux? It's when the acid comes up. And what's a person given if they have acid reflux? Antacids, is that right? Do you know, that defies reason for me. Why give a person antacids? Because the stomach is supposed to be acid. The problem's not the acid in the stomach. The problem is the fact that this valve is weak, allowing acid to come up into the esophagus. We had one guest and her esophagus was ulcerated because so much acid had come up into the esophagus. The problem's not the acid. It's supposed to be the problem is that little valve. So why would that little valve allow the acid up? There's a few reasons. One is that many people today are eating breakfast like a pauper, lunch like a pauper, king and the queen is supper together, so much food, and then they lie down to sleep at night or in their easy chair, and the stomach is so overburdened. The stomach, who thought it was going to have a rest because the sun's gone down, and when the sun goes down, everything slows down. It has to fight hard to try and break this food down, and because of gravity, when the person lies down, the food presses against the cardiac sphincter, weakening it. This is not the odd day someone might even eat an evening meal, but it's day after day, after week, after month, little by little weakening this valve. This valve is a muscle, and it looks like this. And when it tightens, it opens. And when it's relaxed, it's closed. So if someone's stressed and their muscles tighten, can you see that would open? So stress can contribute to it. Also, low hydrochloric acid contribute to it. Because a person has low stomach acid, they're not going to be effectively breaking their food down, and it can start to ferment, and the fumes can start to come up. You see, there's no such thing as too much stomach acid. It's a misconception. Dogs have 10 times the stomach acid that we have, and they don't have reflux or heartburn, but they certainly can handle rotten food because the acid deals with that. So in the stomach, we'll have a look at the lining of the stomach. There are big folds that go like this. And these folds are lined with gastric glands. And these gastric glands, 2/3 of them release mucus. And the reason for that is that what's being released here is the hydrochloric acid. So hydrochloric acid is released from here, from the parietal glands. There's the hydrochloric acid, and one drop of that would burn a hole in your skin. So no wonder God planned it so there's a thick mucosal wall lining the stomach to protect the stomach lining. What also is released is pepsinogen. These two unite, but they only unite in an acid environment, and they release pepsin. And it is pepsin that breaks down protein. So the enzyme in the stomach is pepsin that is released, and pepsin breaks down protein. That connection can only happen in an acid environment, and pepsin can only work in an acid environment. So as you can see, it's vital that this stomach be acid. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, fantastic. You must be digesting your food very, very well. But I meet many who have low hydrochloric acid. How do you know if you've got low? If you've got low hydrochloric acid, your digestion's not going to be very effective or efficient. And it's 6 hours since you've eaten and you feel like you've just eaten. The food is not getting digested properly. So what would cause low hydrochloric acid? Drinking with the meals, that waters down the acid. Eating every couple of hours, exhausting the acid. Stress, worry. Do you feel like eating when you've just had some bad news? No, our emotions also affected. Something else is released from here. It's called the intrinsic factor. And the intrinsic factor is required to absorb vitamin B12. So let me show you the B12 story. My thumb is B12 and my finger is R protein. And B12 and R protein are connected in food. When they get into the stomach, the hydrochloric acid releases them. And the intrinsic factor is also released. Here's intrinsic factor. And intrinsic factor and B12 float together until they get down to the last part of the small intestine. Then they connect, allowing the B12 to be absorbed into the enterohepatic circulation. Hepatic meaning liver. This circulation goes around and round up to the liver and down again, and that B12 will stay in that circulation until you need it. And when you need it, it is released. A person can have no B12 in their diet for 30 years before they show a deficiency. Most people that are low in B12, it's because they don't have enough intrinsic factor. Why wouldn't they have enough intrinsic factor? For the same reason, they've got low hydrochloric acid. And by the way, if they've got low hydrochloric acid, then B12 and R protein aren't released. So what would compromise the release of these digestive glands? Eating every couple of hours, drinking with the meals, stress with the meal, eating huge amounts of food at the end of the day so your poor old stomach gets overworked and exhausted. How many Americans do all of that? Many people are ignorant, not realising the effect of that lifestyle on the gut. And again, it's not just once or twice, it's just every day, every day, every day, every day that these things are happening. I read a very interesting book a few years ago by Dr. William Beaumont. And Dr. William Beaumont was called to an accident in the early 1800s. It was in a trading store, and a young man named Alexis St. Martin, he was only 18 at the time, he'd sustained a gunshot wound to the stomach, and it had blown part of his stomach and his ribs away. The doctor assessed him and said he would not live, but he did. And every day the doctor attended him in the hospital and he began to revive. Twice, a big tumour rose in the area, burst, a whole lot of pus came out, and a 2-inch piece of rib. Why did the body make a tumour? Isn't that interesting? To get rid of that piece of rib. We looked at our immune system on Thursday, didn't we, and the white blood cells that are made. But as Alexis St. Martin healed, he ever after had a little hole in his stomach. It was like a mouth and it had a little flap over it. The book was written in 1833. I'd heard about this book and our secretary put it into Amazon and they found me a book in a southern college. Charged me 20 cents. I think it cost $20 by the time I got the book in Australia. But fascinating book. The first third of the book is the story. Alexis St. Martin lived till he was 80. He married, had children, but after his accident, he stayed with Dr. Beaumont for a couple of years. And Dr. Beaumont, he saw his opportunity. He'd get a piece of thread with a bit of food on it and put it in the hole, leave it there an hour, take it out, have a look at it. Leave it in a few more hours, take it out, have a look at it. And he found that digestion took 3.5 to 4 hours. He also found that the stomach loves a rest of 1 hour. So that should be 5 to 6 hours between meals. And I find it interesting that traditionally people have been told to eat every couple of hours for the last 30, 40 years. But in the last 5, 6 years, they're now suggesting time-restricted eating. Have you had a look at time-restricted eating? It's from the same authors that put together the 5-2 diet or the intermittent fasting. And that is eating twice, 6 hours apart in a 24-hour day. And they are finding with this time-restricted eating, diabetics are managing their blood sugar levels better, people are losing weight, people are sleeping better. There's a whole lot of benefits from this. And when you understand what Dr. William Beaumont discovered in all his experiments on this hole in the stomach, that you can start to see why people are getting such good results. But I wanted to show you, in all his research, Dr. Beaumont found that there were 5 things that caused the food to be still in the stomach 8 hours later. So what caused the food to be still in the stomach after 8 hours? If Alexis St. Martin overate, Dr. Beaumont came to the conclusion that there's only so many digestive juices released. And if we overburden the stomach, it just physically can't get through it all. It's like my big strong sons carrying a big load up the hill, and then I have to carry the load up the hill. I don't know whether I'd get to the top. Same with the stomach. There's only so much that it can handle. That's why you are better stopping before you feel really full. You're best to stop just when you're feeling comfortable. If Alexis St. Martin often ate, so most of the time, especially in the early 1800s, most people ate and then went to work, or ate and went to school. This eating all day long that came up in about the 70s, 80s, I think, I wonder if it was being put forward by the fast food people to encourage people to eat all their food. He found that this pyloric sphincter, the little sphincter at the end of the stomach, it seems to have sensors, and it can sense when the food's broken down. And when the food starts to get broken down to the right state, it opens. But let's say a couple of hours after breakfast, someone has a cup of tea and a biscuit, or a cup of tea and a sandwich, or maybe they're really healthy and it's an apple and a handful of nuts. No matter what it is, pyloric sphincter says, shut the gate quickly, something's just come in, it's not broken down. And it'll stay shut until this, bit by bit, gets broken down. Joining this, then it can open again, and a little bit more goes through. And then a couple of hours later, lunch comes in. Shut the gate, quick, shut the gate. And so at the end of the day, 8 hours later, there can still be a bit of breakfast still left in there. Also, one of the other things that caused the food to be in the stomach 8 hours later was large fluid with the meal. I always say to people, if you're thirsty after a meal, by all means have a mouthful or two, but it is an indication that you probably sat to eat dehydrated. We should stop drinking water about half an hour before the meal and then resume drinking about an hour and a half to 2 hours after the meal. If we wait 1.5 to 2 hours after the meal, that gives enough time for these digestive enzymes to work on the food. If he was stressed at all, Dr. Beaumont found the only time Alexis St. Martin got annoyed with the fact that bits of food were being put in and out of his stomach was if the night before he'd had alcohol. But if he had alcohol with the meal, that also slowed digestion down. How many Americans are doing all of that? Again, in ignorance, not realising the effect. What they have found, long-term antacid use is contributing to colon cancer because the food's not getting broken down because there's not enough acid. And so it can't be absorbed. So partially digested foods is coming into the colon, and the colon says, what are you doing here? And then a lot of bacteria, excess bacteria, has to be made to deal with it, and that can start eating down the colon wall. If someone's been on, I think one popular one is Nexium. If someone's been on Nexium for 10 years, do you know what my response to that is? Is it working? If they've been on it for 10 years, is it working? No, it's not. So that's what's happening in the stomach. Only one food is broken down in the stomach. I have to move this across a bit. Only one food is broken down in the stomach, and that is protein. The starch digestion is put on hold in the stomach because of the acid environment. So now we come through the pyloric sphincter and into the duodenum, and then it's a very busy place down here. So let's have a look at the duodenum. Now the duodenum is an alkaline environment. The only place in the body that should be acid is the stomach. And as you can see, it must be acid so that the pepsin can work on the protein. So look here under the right rib is the liver, and the liver has a gallbladder underneath. The gallbladder is a reservoir holding the bile ready to break down the fats. So let's have a look at liver. So the liver releases bile. And bile is the enzyme that breaks down fats into tiny little particles. It's almost like it emulsifies it. So the liver releases bile, which breaks down polyunsaturated fats. Remember where the saturated fats got their breakdown? Is in the mouth. So these are the polyunsaturated fats, which I guess your nuts and your seeds are high in polyunsaturated fats. We've also got the pancreas. Can you see the pancreas is releasing also into the duodenum? So let's have a look what the pancreas does. The pancreas releases pancreatic lipase, and pancreatic lipase further breaks down the polyunsaturated fats. So the bile emulsifies it into tinier particles, so the pancreatic lipase can break it right down so that it can be absorbed. The pancreas also releases pancreatic amylase. In the mouth, remember the salivary amylase ptyalin started the starch breakdown, and pancreatic amylase finalises the starch. So the starch began in the mouth, it was put on hold in the acid stomach, and then it comes down into the duodenum, and under the action of pancreatic amylase, that breakdown is finalised. The pancreas also releases trypsin, and trypsin finalises protein digestion. Protein digestion began in the stomach, and now it's finalised in the duodenum from the enzyme from the pancreas, which is trypsin, and there's another one called chymotrypsin. So there are two enzymes there that do the breakdown with protein. Now I've got some good news, it's not going to get any harder than this. Okay, students, considering the different places that digestion takes place, which organ is the main organ of digestion? The pancreas? In fact, most people that have pancreatic cancer or the pancreas stops working, they usually die quite quickly, and they die from malnutrition. Can you see why? Because if you can't finalise all this, then it cannot be absorbed into the blood. The enzymes that break down protein are called proteolytic enzymes. So what's a proteolytic enzyme? Proteolytic. Proteolytic enzymes are pepsin, trypsin, and chymotrypsin, because they're the three that break down protein. But God, in his wisdom and mercy, put some proteolytic enzymes in foods. and one is in the core of the pineapple, and it's called bromelain. Bromelain is a proteolytic enzyme. Now, you don't have to eat 3 pineapples and 3 cores with every meal. But whenever I eat a pineapple, I always eat that little bit of core. And the core's pretty tough. But if every slice, and then you cut the slice into quarters, and everyone just gets a little bit of the core, that's much easier. I was eating with a family recently, only a couple of weeks ago, and I noticed the father, who the day before had told me he had an inflamed pancreas, I noticed that he put his pineapple core aside, and I said, excuse me. I said, that is very good for your pancreas. It's a proteolytic enzyme. He said, really? And then he ate them. He didn't know. But you can buy supplements that have got bromelain in them. Also papain. Papain is an extract from the papaya or pawpaw. So you can buy tablets that have got enzymes in them. So anyone with pancreatic problems should be on proteolytic enzymes, and you can buy them. But be cautious, because some of them have porcine in it, which is from the stomach of the pig. That I'm not interested in that. You will also find some enzymes. They're sometimes called pancreatic enzymes or digestive enzymes, and they'll have bromelain and papain, and they also have some other enzymes that have been created by culturing foods. So let me explain protein digestion. So that's protein for purposes of illustration. Pepsin, that breaks down protein, will break this protein down to peptides and polypeptides, poly meaning many. Now, the peptides and the polypeptides come down into the duodenum, and trypsin and chymotrypsin break the peptides down to amino acid, and the polypeptide down to amino acid and peptide, and then amino acids. It's only as amino acids that it can be absorbed into the gut. Now, let's say the person's drinking with their meals, eating all day long, having the largest meal at the end of the day, and hydrochloric acid is low. Some proteins may get down to the duodenum. And the pancreas says, what are you doing here? And he says, they're drinking with their meals, they're eating all day long. And trypsin and chymotrypsin do the best they can. That they might only be able to break this down, the protein down, to peptides and polypeptides. And so as it floats down here, and by the way, all of our food, all the nutrients in our food that we are going to be able to use are absorbed halfway down the small intestine. So it's floating down here, and the small intestine says, what are you doing here? We can't take you. You're not broken down. We can only take amino acids. And they said, oh, we're terribly sorry. Trypsin and chymotrypsin did the best they could, but things aren't happening well in the stomach. Comes through into the large intestine, the colon, and the colon says, what are you doing here? And so the bacteria has to be created to try and break it down, and that creates methane gas. You've heard of methane gas. So that's a lot of wind, a lot of bloating, all because of what happened way up there. So how can you boost hydrochloric acid if hydrochloric acid levels are low? If hydrochloric acid levels are low, my suggestion is to drink 8+ water between meals. Remember, little by little by little. Try and have 2 or 3 glasses before breakfast, and stop half an hour before breakfast. if it's 15 minutes to breakfast and you need more water, try and have a glass of hot water or very warm water with a bit of lemon, and it'll be absorbed a bit quicker. You'll get away with that. And then try not to drink water again for an hour and a half for 2 hours. Chew very, very well. Make sure you're in a very pleasant environment when you eat. And there are a few things you can take that will boost your digestive enzymes. The old saying, bitter to the mouth, sweet to the stomach, and sweet to the mouth, bitter to the stomach. A lot of sugar, a lot of sweet things can cause a little bit of fermentation to be happening. But if you have bitter foods, the bitterness in the mouth gives a message to the brain to release more digestive enzymes. And so hot ginger tea, that's a sweet bitter, or you could even have some real bitters in there with dandelion or St. Mary's thistle. Even just 15 minutes before the meal, the hot bitter tea can boost the release of the digestive enzymes. The juice of a lemon before the meal, that's a little bit of a bitter. Cayenne pepper, 1/4 teaspoon of cayenne pepper in a little bit of water just before the meal. They're only little bits of water, so they're not going to make a difference. But that cayenne pepper will wake anything up. So now we come to the grand finale of digestion. Lining the small intestine are villi. And these villi have a lacteal. The lacteal, that's right up the middle of the villi, and this lacteal is part of your lymphatic system. Then all through the villi is the blood. Remember, the food that you eat is not part of you or me until it gets broken down into tiny little substances, and then it can get taken into the blood. Lining the small intestine is a thick turf wall. And this thick turf wall is made up of Lactobacillus acidophilus bifidus bacterium. Your healthy or your friendly or your natural bacteria, often called the microbiome, that's what it's often called now. And that gut flora is responsible for the final breakdown. It particularly releases the B vitamins. So that healthy bacteria, healthy flora is helping with the final breakdown of the food. It's responsible for the absorption of our food out of the gut and into the blood. That bacteria also plays a protective role. It protects the blood from any harmful pathogens that might be in the gut. And it also nourishes the cells that line the gastrointestinal tract. How important it is that we have a nice level of gut flora. That's why your cultured foods are important. That's your sauerkraut, there's your miso, there's your yogurts. You get some very nice almond yogurts now. They help to maintain this healthy environment in the gut flora. What would break it down? Antibiotics break it down. One writer said, taking an antibiotic is like dropping a bomb in the gastrointestinal tract. What did the atomic bomb kill? Good and bad alike. And that's what antibiotics do. They're not selective, they just kill. I'm so glad that God gave us herbs. In Psalm 104 verse 14, the Bible says that God gave herbs for the service of man. They're there to serve you. They don't kill you off. So some natural antibiotics are things like garlic, olive leaf extract. Some people use the colloidal silver. What also breaks down the lining of the gastrointestinal tract is long-term painkillers, I've met a few people that have had serious injuries and they got off their painkillers by drinking more water, eating nourishing food, going to bed early, but exercise. In fact, 2 guys I know, they work out hard an hour and a half a day. They said, if we don't, we're on painkillers. The injury they sustained was so serious that they will be managing that for the rest of their life. But if you can manage it, you're doing well. I say to them, praise God daily, you're not dead. Because both accidents were so serious they should have died. But if you can manage it, you're doing well. And everyone I know is managing something. And God has promised that he will come again soon. And that's when we'll have the body that has no sickness. But I thank God for these natural remedies that allow us to manage any hiccups that we have. What also can break that down is your statin drugs. They're your cholesterol-lowering medication. We looked at them last night, and we also showed that that's a drug you can stop immediately. The only side effect is that your memory will return. It's a dangerous drug. Also, refined sugar. Refined sugar harms because it is such an acid. I'm not talking about the sugar cane that is high in minerals and fibre. That's the way God meant us to eat it, not as that pure crystallised acid that's been extracted from the sugar cane plant. So whenever you get this compromise in gut flora, you get a compromise in the breakdown, you get a compromise in the absorption, you get a compromise in protection, and the cells that line your gut get a compromise in the nourishment. The polyunsaturated fats are absorbed straight into the lacteal, whereas all the others go straight into the blood. Earlier in the week we had a look at the liver and how everything goes to the liver, and then the liver determines where everything goes. Down the end of the small intestine is the ileum, and this is the ileocecal valve. The ileocecal valve is a two-way valve. And remember I mentioned it is here where your B12 is absorbed. And everything that comes into the large intestine or the colon is in a liquid form. So one of the main functions of the colon is to take water out so stools are formed. Down underneath the ileocecal valve is the appendix. God never makes a mistake, and he never made a mistake when he put the appendix there. The appendix has 2 vital roles in the body. One is that it lubricates the contents of the colon so it can pass through with greater ease, and it also releases antibacterial fluid. Now, if what's coming out of the small intestines is toxic, what would be toxic? When meat breaks down, it putrefies. Dogs can get away with it because they have 10 times the hydrochloric acid we have, and their gut is only 1 yard long. Ours is 8 yards long. I say a yard because I usually say metre, and I think a metre is about a yard. So by the time it's getting down here, I have to tell you, it's a very warm environment. It's getting pretty putrid. And especially if the person had a whole lot of ice cream and Coca-Cola, all that sugar just feeds that putrefaction process. So when it's coming out of here, this pancreas is working hard, releasing the antibacterial fluid to try and calm it down before it gets out. A friend of my husband's recently got married. He's a man in his 60s, and he just lived it up at the wedding and after the wedding, and he was sending photos of wine and steaks and all this rich food. Well, he ended up in hospital with a burst appendix. Whoa, his poor appendix just couldn't take the load. And that's what often happens. The appendix gets inflamed when it's just overworked. Notice there are lots of corners and grooves in our large intestine. They need to be swept every day, and fibre sweeps it. And our best fibre is our plant fibre. We should be on a plant-based diet, which all its fibre, which is the way God meant it to be, especially the vegetables. We had some dark greens yesterday, and we need to do a lot of chewing to get those greens in. I think some of them were some of the wild greens, but oh, that's great fibre in here. So that's really the main function of the colon. So water's taken out, so stools are formed. But the fibre not only sweeps the corners of the gastrointestinal tract, the fibre stimulates peristalsis, so you've got a movement through. It is estimated that in our 8 metres or 8 yards of the gastrointestinal tract, there's often 2, sometimes 3 meals at a time there. So maybe when lunch comes in here, breakfast is maybe here, and maybe if we had something light the night before, it's down in here. We should be evacuating ideally 16 hours after we've eaten. The average transit time is usually 24 hours. Dr. Kellogg, a very famous doctor who wrote many books on the health, gut health, he said 3 intakes of food a day should equal 3 evacuations a day. 2 intakes of food a day should equal 2 evacuations a day. He considered going once a day was constipation. And if you notice that the colon's got a mind of its own, if you tell it to go, it won't. And if it's going too much and you tell it to stop, it won't. So the colon needs to be gently stimulated. So if it's not going enough, there are a few things you can do, and a lot of people have a problem with this. We should promptly answer nature's immediate call. You see that? When the body says go, go. How many people are on the phone to a friend and they feel to go, but you know they've got things that they want to tell their friends, so they don't go. And then at the end of the phone call, they go to sit in the bathroom and it doesn't happen. Or they're reading a book, or they're watching something on and they don't want to go right now, so they stop, they hold. And I'm so glad that we have the ability to hold, because that prevents accidents. And there's a little muscle called puborectalis right at the end that just holds the last part of the colon up. But unfortunately, that is often abused. So if you feel to go, it's because there's pressure here. And if you don't go, then the contents goes back here. And what's happening? More water's being taken out. So please promptly answer nature's immediate call. When the body says go, we must go. So that's one point. Another point is drink adequate water. If you're dehydrated, more water gets taken out than should be taken out. Exercise. Exercise massages the colon. So when you're jumping on the rebounder, look at your colon. Every jump, it's moving. When you're walking, the colon is moving at every step you take, especially your Pilates type exercises, you know, your core strengthening exercises. All those moves massage and strengthen the colon. It is also important to eat the high fibre diet. But what if you're doing all that and still the colon's only going once a day, sometimes once every 2 days? You can take some herbs. I'm going to give you the recipe for a herb tea. This is in my book. We call it colon tea, and we've been using it at our retreat now for about 18 years with great success. It's 1 part cascara, and it's 2 part licorice, and it's 3 part buckthorn. Buckthorn is a bark, as is cascara, whereas the licorice is a root. Cascara is very bitter, buckthorn's not so bitter, and licorice is quite sweet. So it's a bittersweet tea. So you mix up these dried herbs, and then the rule of thumb is 1 teaspoon to 1 cup of water. And then it has a gentle simmer, because whenever you've got roots or barks, you need a gentle simmer there. A gentle simmer on a low heat, about 10 to 15 minutes. The dose is to take 1 cup of that tea before you go to bed at night. And most people will find that in the morning they will go. If by the middle of the day the person hasn't gone, they can have another cup of tea. I'll give you the story of a psychologist who did our program, and she went once a week with help. She was late 60s. She needed 3 cups of colon tea a day, 1 in the morning, 1 in the middle of the day, 1 before bed. And we also were doing a castor oil compress on her abdomen, which helped. Within a couple of days, she was going twice a day. She was so excited. She hadn't experienced this for a long, long time. I think about 30 years. After a couple of days, the colour of her skin changed. The whites of her eyes became very white. By the end of the week, she said, "My mind is so clear." She said, "Maybe this is the problem with most of my patients." What is she? A psychologist. She gave me this feedback. She said she went home and she continued 3 cups of tea a day. She said after 6 weeks, she started to go 4 times a day. So she brought it back to 2 cups a day. After 6 weeks, she started to go 4 times a day, so she brought it back to 1 cup a day. After 6 weeks, she started to go 4 times a day, so she stopped. Now, may I add that she was also drinking more water. She was going to bed early. She was exercising. She'd gone on a plant-based diet. But that was not enough initially. She needed to help the colon by the tea. This tea contains herbs that gently revive and restore colon function. That is the good news. So what if someone has hemorrhoids? Often hemorrhoids are a result of constipation, too much pressure in this area. So there's a few things that you can do. Let me show you one of the things that can be done. The person is sitting on the throne to do their daily evacuation. And when a person sits on the throne to do their daily evacuation, that little muscle remains taut. Now, as you can see, things can get through. But if they sit every day with a little stool in the front of the throne so that their knees are up in the squatting position, that causes puborectalis to relax. And when puborectalis relaxes, the colon opens up wide and the contents pass with much greater ease. Traditionally, people have always squatted. I've been in Africa, I've been in India, I've been in Indonesia, in Singapore, and in all those countries, sometimes I'd go into the bathroom and the toilet was a hole in the floor. It's all tiled, it's all flush, it's all very clean, but it's a hole in the floor. Now science shows why it is the most effective way to do the daily evacuation, because when we're in the squatting position, puborectalis relaxes, allowing the contents of the colon to empty with greater ease. It also takes all the pressure off the anus. Now, if this person's sitting and decides to help things along a bit and starts straining, all the pressure goes to the anus, and that's one of the reasons why hemorrhoids happen. So if a person wants to prevent hemorrhoids, keep that colon working regularly and squat. If someone wants to cure hemorrhoids, make sure you get that little stool. You can go to Bed Bath and Beyond and buy Squatty Potty, and that is a stool that wraps around the base of the toilet. You can also use suppositories. So a couple of suppositories that you can make. One is to get a leaf of aloe vera and cut the skin off and then cut the gel in the middle into pieces about the size of your little finger and freeze them. And then just before bed at night, you can insert the aloe vera, the frozen aloe vera, and it will have a lovely soothing effect on that area. And then in the morning when you do your daily evacuation, it will just come out. The other is to get a cotton ball, moisten it with castor oil, shape it into the shape of your little finger and freeze it. Now that takes 3 days to freeze. 3 days to freeze the castor oil that has been soaked on that cotton bud. So if a person has hemorrhoids, my suggestion is do aloe vera one night, do castor oil the next night. You might alternate them. And we have had many people say that it brings a lot of relief and it also contributes to the healing. But what if someone's going too much? What if they're going 6, 8, 10 times a day? Well, there's an excellent herb that can slow things down, and that is slippery elm. And slippery elm is the bark, the powdered bark of the slippery elm tree. And when you put water with it, it goes a little thick. So the way to mix it is a teaspoon of the slippery elm powder into half a cup of hot water, and you mix it very well so it doesn't go too lumpy, and throw it down. Drink it before it gets too thick. Some people like it thick. But that slippery elm coats, soothes and heals the lining of the gastrointestinal tract. Slippery elm contains a growth stimulant, so it can stimulate rapid healing in the lining of the gut. If someone's going 10 times a day, I suggest taking the slippery elm every 2 hours. If it starts to slow down, they can back off a little bit. Maybe if things start to settle right down, the person may only need to take it morning and just before bed at night. I have also found that when someone has something like irritable bowel, Crohn's disease, colitis, it's also very important they stop the 5 allergens. These allergens are particularly irritating to the lining of the gut. That is refined sugar. That is not a surprise. Also peanuts, because of the mold factor. The hybridized wheat of today is particularly irritating to the lining of the gut if the lining of the gut is inflamed. Also, dairy. Cow's milk is excellent milk for baby cows. And for some people, oats are a problem, and some people, oats aren't. So I have a question mark with the oats. But if someone has irritable bowel, my suggestion is to stop all of them. As the gut heals, maybe the oats might be the first one that you might implement. And we have seen many people totally heal from irritable bowel disease. So before we have a break, let me give you a story to illustrate. We had a man come to do our program. He was in his late 60s, and I said, "What's your reason for coming to our retreat?" He said, "I'm here to support my wife." In other words, he did not really want to be here, but she'd paid the full of money, so he had to come. So as I consulted with him, I discovered he had irritable bowel. I said, "Really? How many times a day do you go?" He said, 6. He said, "On my morning walk, I go 4 times. He said, "I live near the beach and I know where all the toilets are." So my walk is planned around where I can stop. I said, "Are you on any medication?" He said, "Yes, I'm on cortisone and I'm on anti-inflammatories. In fact," he said, "the doctor recently told me he can do no more for me." He said, "I have been on these medications for over 10 years. I said, "What do you have for breakfast?" He said, "Slice of toast, butter and jam, and a cup of coffee with milk and sugar." Well, we've got a few ticks there. I said, "What do you have mid-morning?" "A cup of coffee with milk and sugar and a biscuit." "What's the biscuit made out of?" "Yes, dairy and wheat and sugar." "What do you have for lunch?" "Sandwich with ham and cheese and another cup of coffee and my wife's sugar biscuits." "What do you have at night?" "I have a big steak and I have maybe some pasta He said, I really like ice cream with chocolate flavouring. There, we've got a lot of sugar there. And then he said, I have a cup of coffee, but I really like having 2 Jack Daniels at night. I said, aha. Well, at the retreat, we don't serve any of those things. I said to him, do you mind if I try a few things? He said, no, I've got nothing to lose. The doctor can't do anything else. So we gave him Slippery-Om 4 times a day. We gave him Slippery-Om at 8 o'clock, we gave him Slippery-Om at 12 o'clock, we gave him Slippery-Om at 6 o'clock, and just before he went to bed, we gave him another dose. The next morning when I saw him, he said, I don't know what that stuff is. He said, but I've only gone 3 times this morning instead of 4. The next day, Tuesday, he came up to me when I came in at about 8:30. He said, I'm not bleeding from the colon anymore. He said, I haven't got the cramping anymore. He was just living with this. This was on all his medication. So by Thursday, he said to me, I only went twice this morning and another time in the afternoon. I have no more bleeding, I have no cramping. And I said to him, because you're going so well, would you consider, and I said, I have no say over this, it's your choice, but if I were you, I would consider stopping your anti-inflammatories. Now, if he stopped his anti-inflammatories and he started going 10 times, you've got a choice, go back on the anti-inflammatories or go back on half the inflammatories or start taking Slippery-Om 10 times a day. See, the beauty of being at the retreat, he could try these things. It didn't have any effect because his gut had settled down so much, the stopping of the anti-inflammatories didn't affect. When I was having the final consultation with him, I said, well, this is great news. You're off your anti-inflammatories. The colon settled right down, no more pain, no more cramping, no more bleeding from the colon, and his stools actually had form. And he was going 3, maybe 4 times a day. I said to him, you've got a choice now. You can work with your doctor or you can do it yourself, but I'd look at starting to ease off your cortisones, but you have to do that very, very slowly. So if he's on 20 milligrams of cortisone, he has to go down to 15. And then maybe 3 weeks later, down to 10. So very, very slowly. I said, you can do it yourself because if you start to get, if it starts to go too much, you can increase your Slippery-Om or you can just go back on that cortisone and then wait another couple of weeks. But little by little by little, he had the opportunity to come off it all. He went home a very happy man. But on Sunday morning, this was the last day, Michael and I have breakfast with the guests Sunday morning. He came running up to me. He said, I've just gone on my morning walk and I haven't gone. He was just so excited. Now, do you remember why he came to our retreat? Just to support the wife. That's all. It's wonderful to see experiences, and so many that I have seen, of people giving the body the right conditions and seeing the body heal. So I trust you've enjoyed our journey through your gastrointestinal tract, and I trust you have a little bit of a deeper understanding on how it all works, because then we automatically have the knowledge on how to treat it.